Welcome to Own Your Zone. My name is Janan Glasgow George, and Own Your Zone is a conversation about how companies can differentiate their businesses from the pack, provide unique value, and craft a competitive advantage in rapidly growing markets by leveraging intellectual property and IP data trends. I'm going to be sharing tips on how to own your zone. We've sought out and found the #1 leader in networking. I'm thrilled today to be able to talk with Keith Ferrazzi. For those of you who don't know him, he's not only a New York Times bestseller, but a graduate of Harvard Business School. He rose to become the youngest CMO of a Fortune 500 company during his career at Deloitte, and later became the CMO of the Starwood Hotels Group. He's a frequent contributor to Forbes, Fortune, Harvard Business Review, and of course, #1 bestseller for his books, Who's Got Your Back and Never Eat Alone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome.
It's my pleasure. Looking forward to the conversation.
Well, let's start with your journey as an entrepreneur in the last 6 months, maybe of 2020. You're obviously very social. Networking is important. You're a leader in this area. How have you addressed it in this really difficult and unprecedented time?
Well, I'll answer in a few ways. First of all, I'm an introvert. And I've learned over time to be consciously competent at building my network. And as a result, I was able to write a book on it, Never Eat Alone, a number of years ago. I found that people have been incredibly available to find ways to touch in, connect, aspire to creating new things together. It's been an extraordinary time to leverage this inflection point to do what I call going forward to work, not slipping back into old work ways. In this period of time, I've started 2 new businesses and 1 research institute. 1 business failed and I'm restarting it, a pivot. Another business languished and I've got a new leader. And the research institute is thriving. That's the Research Institute of Going Forward to Work. And, I think it's an incredible time right now to connect with thought leaders, entrepreneurs, executives, and as a collective, figure out together, or what I call co-elevate, going higher together, figure out together where we're going coming out of this.
Sure. Yeah, obviously we're working with the video call right now. It's not really a substitute purely for the energy and the connection that we have in person. What are some best practices that you can recommend for growth and networking in this sort of virtual environment, if you will?
Yeah, I disagree that the virtual environment is in any way necessarily deficient to the physical environment. In 2015, I funded, along with Cisco and Accenture and Siemens Communications, a $2 million research project called What Are the New People Rules in a Virtual World? Nobody gave a damn about it back then. Today, they seem to care. And what we discovered was that if you try to make virtual as good as physical, then it won't be. If you try to make it better, it can be. So, for instance, in the olden days of networking, I might be flying to New York and stop off in Detroit on my way and have a dinner with one of the more senior automotive executives that I had met along the way. Today, I can host a discussion with 5 executives on a subject of mutual interest, and I don't even have to get on an airplane. And that is accretive to the connection that I might have had otherwise. Now, relative to what one does in that conversation, if somebody shows up and just does small talk, you only get some level of intimacy. If you show up on a video and you talk intimately about what's really going on in your life, I have I have 2 foster kids. One I got at 12 and one I got at 16, and they're 21 and 26 now. And the challenge I have is as a father, I'm willing to share rather openly in this kind of a medium with somebody. I can share openly what some of my just angst is, and more than ever, a lot of people are willing and capable of showing vulnerably up in a video medium. I actually think that the intimacy and the connection can be deeper as a result, depending on what you share. So, you know, I think the idea that this medium isn't as effective, I think it actually can be significantly more effective.
Wow, that's fascinating. So as a patent attorney, I work a lot with inventors and innovators, and I do find that we're gaining some efficiency in communicating and being able to go between a conversation and then sharing drawings or sharing a video. And I do think the familiarity now with video is making that easier, but for many of them, it's hard to disclose things. And if they're worried about security or privacy, they can have some issues with it. But it's interesting. It sounds
there
like
are platforms that have different degrees of securitization. We know that. And one of the things you just mentioned is asynchronous collaboration. You can do a lot more thoughtful. So I invented a new word called coelevation, going higher together. And I find that a combination of direct collaboration, asynchronous collaboration can really advance collaboration a lot more than the traditional meeting format that we used to use. I also feel, and so I'm using Google Docs and in a way that I never used to use before, and I really like it a lot. I'm finding that relative to, again, back to the networking piece, I'm finding that I can reach out to many more people, and many more people have an ounce of time. Used to be, when I wrote Never Eat Alone, I talked about, reaching out to somebody to get 5 minutes and a cup of coffee, 15 minutes and a cup of coffee. Well, it got to the point where I don't even have 15 minutes a cup of coffee for anybody. So that's a piece of advice that wasn't really working, I suspect, anymore. However, today I found that I can get a lot more quick drop-in time from people, because not only did we get time freed up without traveling, but I think people are willing to entertain a little bit more curiosity. Now, you got to make sure that you have a compelling subject matter, just as it always has been. You've got to make sure that you're generous and you have good content to put on the table.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can see how the available time can make it better than things that were merely serendipitous.
Yes, exactly. Well, and by the way, that's a good question. How does serendipity exist? The TED conference this year went online, and unlike old days where you would maybe get some serendipity in the hallway at the TED conference, but when you were sitting in the forum watching a speaker, that's all you were doing. Now, while the speaker's going on, there's an entire text thread going on. Yeah. And that's very powerful. It's actually a very separate form of engagement at an event. And what I was recommending to people lately is, when you go to a conference, make sure that you're actively using the chat room. You let people know in the chat room what your thoughts are, what you do. You're building your brand. Someone's giving you an advertisement platform for what you're thinking about and doing right there. Yeah. And that didn't exist in the past.
Yeah, that makes sense. In our Eclipse conference we had for 7 years, we were bringing together entrepreneurs, investors, and business leaders. And in the content, we were talking about intellectual property and innovation, but people so valued that time just to talk with each other. Yeah. And we always had transactions that came out of it, but the relationships came first.
Yeah, so what we're doing at the Inc. 5000 conference is coming up soon, and I'm the keynote speaker. And I've engineered co-elevation groups. So what's going to happen is I'll give my keynote talk about the new book. The book is called Leading Without Authority, and it introduces this principle of co-elevation and how critical it is to get our teams to support each other in their collaborative efforts. And also just the principle of leading without authority to how the world today works in networks, and it's not about hierarchies. But anyway, I'm going to give my keynote, and then right afterward, the whole conference is going into small breakout rooms of 4 people each. And we're doing a simple exercise in those rooms of 4 where people are sharing with each other some of the struggles they're having. And I've got a format that I use where they support each other. So 5 minutes to share each person's struggle, 5 minutes to ask questions about that struggle, 5 minutes to give advice, then move on to the next person. And in 1 hour, you get 4 people, and now you've got a real deep relationship bond among 4 people that you wouldn't have had in a physical event. So I'm engineering new mediums that, as I said, I think they're better than some of the traditional. Different, but better.
Great. Tell me a little bit more about some of your innovation and your intellectual property. I'm sure that you have been cultivating that as you are releasing a new book, and this format sounds amazing.
Yeah, so my first book was Never Eat Alone, about networking. My second book, Who's Got Your Back, which is that blue one in the back, talks about the power of deep and strong connections and ties, deeper than a network, the kind of what I called lifeline relationships and how crucial they were to our success. We have been implementing, what my job is I coach executive teams. We're coaching the team at General Motors, Verizon, Delta Airlines through this transformation. We coach a team for about a year to fully reboot and transform to a high-performing, co-elevating team. Break down silos, have full candor, transparency in the room, et cetera. The new book, Leading Without Authority, birthed this idea of co-elevation. We work in networks today. So how do you apply the principles of Never Eat Alone, but to your workplace in getting things done? Leading, I was just on the phone this morning to Gartner Group. I'll be speaking to their chief information officer community. I mean, these are functional leaders who don't have the budget and the resources and authority to do what they need to do for their jobs. They've got to earn that right. Business partners. So how do you teach somebody to earn the right to lead, not assume it? And I'm spending a lot of time on that. To that end, as I said, I just started this new foundation, Go Forward to Work, documenting all of the pivotal changes going on in the world today, in the world of business. I mean, we need to be running our organizations in a much more agile fashion. How do we build a more resilient organization? What are the broader implications of diversity and inclusion in our organizations today for innovation, for breakthrough thinking and transformation? So all of that is at Go Forward to Work. And I would imagine some of your audience might be interested in our research around virtual teams. We published that at virtualteamswin.com, and multiple studies, webinars, et cetera, about remote work and how to be remote leaders with more efficacy.
Great. I love that. I mean, I think virtual is certainly something we've all become more accustomed to. Yeah. Are there any obstacles that you think need to be addressed or removed in order to facilitate that?
Well, I think the biggest obstacle, as I said earlier, don't try to do virtual to make it look and feel like physical. Use it better. So the tips, and you can see all of those at virtualteamswin.com. The tips we're giving are really about how do you re-engineer work in a virtual world, not how do you try to do physical world work in a. So for instance, when normally we would have meetings, we would sit in a room and 8 people would talk. That's a physical meeting. Well, now in a remote world, we can tee up the conversation with 8 people, push a button, and everybody goes into a room of 2, discusses the topic. You have much more courage, much more candor. Even the introverts speak. Then you come back into the room in 5 minutes later and have the dialogue fundamentally different. You couldn't have done that in a physical environment. So we're coaching and engineering. How do you reboot meetings? How do you reboot teams to be more effective than they were previously?
It sounds like that may give rise to some inventions and innovations in
Yes.
software.
Totally, totally. In fact, I'm working with a number of organizations, some of the big integrators,
Yeah.
like Accenture, Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, et cetera, to look at those. I'm also sitting with technologists myself and asking the question, what would we build? Because this interface alone is not going to be sufficient. We need to think about, what do we build? Microsoft Teams has gone further ahead. I know that Zoom is doing a lot of research in that area. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to being a part of the solution.
Yeah, I like the idea not just of co-elevating, but co-creating.
Yeah.
It seems that the distributed team has some advantages, especially cross-collaboration, for sure.
Yes. Well, this has been a real pleasure. Thanks for the time you spent, and thanks for inviting me. I've been looking forward to meeting you. I've done more and more research about you, and you're doing some extraordinary work.
Thank you. Well, I know that we're both optimists. I see from data and from working with innovators and entrepreneurs and businesses across technologies, there's an increase in intellectual property filing. There's an increase in investment in innovation, in solutions to problems. And so that gives me optimism, not just for the economy, but for our attitudes, and I think overall to elevate our quality of life. Do you have a closing thought for us about that?
Probably the great closing thought I have in general is that in a remote world, the team that you work with and the team that you lead is not limited to those that report to you. You and I have just joined each other's team. We've got to know each other. We've extended how we serve each other. And it's powerful that to begin to think about, I call it, in leading without authority, I call it teaming out. You have to think really about, who do you need to work with to achieve extraordinary things? And then how do you serve them? And that's a wonderful mindset maybe to leave with anybody watching, which is, you have the ability to be a transformative leader at a time like this. The question is, who's your team and how do you enlist them to co-create great things? That would be the next step I'd be looking for you.